Hello and welcome to Please Me. Last week, author and swinging lifestyle coach Lexi Silver once again graced us with her presence and talked all about ethical non-monogamy and how to introduce your partner to this world. She is so insightful and smart and so naughty all at once, and I definitely recommend you check out all she has to share. This podcast is intended for mature audiences. Eve is a licensed physical therapist who is on a mission to destigmatize conversations about sex. In her PT practice, Eve treats conditions related to sexual health. Please relax and enjoy the show. Hello and welcome to Please Me, the podcast that aims to destigmatize conversations about sex and sexual health by turning the sheets into our classroom. Today, I have the honor to welcome Sara Webb to our podcast, and I am so excited to have her on today. She is a resilience coach, and she helps female professionals get over heartbreak and connect to the power within. She helps women get over their exes and get back to themselves. And I think that this is so interesting. I talk to a lot of different types of coaches, and this is the first time that I've ever heard of a resilience coach. And I think it's so key because oftentimes our relationships fall apart. I mean, the statistics of marriage, I believe, is about 50%, right? And this is just marriage. Then there's tons of other types of relationships. And, so how do you get over that? So I think that this is really super interesting topic. And I welcome you, Sara, to the podcast today. How are you today?
Thank you so much, Eve, for the warm welcome. I do just want to share my .com. I know you'll put it in the show notes, but I am at Sara Webb Says everywhere. So SarawebBsays.com, as well as on all your socials. So thank you for the warm welcome. And it's kind of surprising that you haven't heard of a resilience coach. I feel like I like a different moniker sometimes, but it's so fitting for what I do that it really feels authentic, and I'm gonna keep it. So yeah, thank you so much for the opportunity to speak with you and your listeners.
Yeah, it's really just, one niche of relationships. And I think it's so key because oftentimes when you break up, you really feel so alone and you really do need somebody to talk to. And, oftentimes our friends don't want to hear it anymore. And you really need to work through some things. So I think it's a wonderful thing that you're doing. And I would love to hear, first of all, what brought you to this type of profession and your story, your particular story.
Yes, I'd love to share my story. I do want to touch on something that you mentioned, which is that loneliness, that isolation. And before I get to my story, I am a science buff. I am not a scientist, but I guess I should have been. And I love to learn about the neuroscience and the biology behind everything that I teach. And there are a few things that really stand out as it relates to loneliness. First, this idea of feeling abandoned is in our DNA as Homo sapiens. So thousands of years ago, even centuries ago, if we were kicked out of the tribe or kicked out of the walls of the city, it was certain death. And so social rejection affects us in much the same way. And to boot, they've actually proved neurologically by doing brain scans of people that social rejection affects the same parts of the brain as being physically maimed. It's like separating one of our limbs from our body. It's that kind of intensity. And so you so aptly described this great pain that we feel. And we also have this further isolation in that, yes, sometimes we feel like we can't talk about it to the people who remain in our lives. It's like when we have specifically a romantic partnership that's been severed, we've lost our best friend and we've need them in that time. We need them to comfort us for the loss that we're experiencing. And then we try to talk about it to our other loved ones, and they kind of get tired of hearing it, and they say really lame things like, get over her, get over him, there's more fish in the sea, or only time will heal the wound. All these maxims that really are so vapid and meaningless and have no validity toward the literal pain that we're suffering from. But in answer to your question, I come about this so honestly. I am trained, well, I have more certifications than you can shake a stick at. But when I first started coaching, I called myself a meditation coach, and I still am a meditation coach because meditation makes us more resilient. That's been proven scientifically as well. So I use meditative practices in order to help people find themselves, go on a journey within, a journey toward themselves, toward their truest authenticity. And my story with heartbreak starts very early. And it wasn't necessarily romantic. In fact, it wasn't at all. My first tales of heartbreak were friends. I, for whatever reason that we can't go into right now, switched schools. My dad put me at this private school and then this private school. And it wasn't behavior. It was just choice. And it was a small school in both instances. And so a small class, like, one second grade class, one sixth grade class, that's it. So I came into, in both of those instances, friendships that were already established with a pair of women, pair of girls, if you will. And at some point, a year or so later, both of them, came to me and said, we don't want to be friends with you anymore. We don't think that you're a good friend. And that was truly heartbreaking for me. And I continued to experience heartbreak when I started dating romantically in my teens, in my 20s. About 14 years ago, I had a romantic relationship. I was engaged, and my fiance cheated on me while I was sleeping in the next room. And I was about to quit everything that I was doing, move to another city, go back to school so that I could support my fiance in their pursuits. And it was a complete reversal of everything that we had planned together. Fast forward, I got married to my now ex-husband and the father of my child. And while I chose to end that marriage, it was me who asked for the divorce. And I also came out of closet at the same time, that same year. It was still a heartbreak because, when we start romantic relationships, there's so much ineffable that we can't really pin down. We understand this person is making promises. Maybe they're spoken promises. Maybe they're unspoken promises. There's so much that we don't understand that they actually mean about what that's going to look like in the relationship with those words or contracts. And I felt a sense of betrayal because I felt like he had not lived up to these promises that we had made to one another. After I came out of the closet, I got married rather quickly. There's a joke in the LGBT community, and it's two parts. The joke is, what does a gay man bring on a second date? And the punchline is, there is no second date. Okay. Pointing to the fact that men like to spread their seed, right? Well, the second part of the joke is, what do lesbians bring on a second date? And the punchline is a U-Haul.
And they're moving in together already.
And, that's also pointing to this physiological need for nesting, for really cultivating that relationship very quickly. So when you have two men involved, there's almost no second date. And when you have two women involved, we get together very quickly. So we call it the U-Haul phenomena in the community. And my ex-wife and I packed that U-Haul very quickly and got engaged after 3 months and married after 6. And that relationship only lasted 2 years total. And I did not want to give up. I really thought this was the love of my life. And this was true heartbreak, especially finally living my truth, finally out of the closet. I thought, this is my person forever. And I was already a meditation coach. And this devastating end of the relationship has been so enlightening and allowed me to step into an area of meditative coaching that is so delicious to me. I absolutely relish helping women who are suffering as a result of a breakup, which actually lesbians are statistically twice as likely to get a divorce than gay men.
Really interesting.
And so, yeah, I mean, this is a real problem, and there's no one out there doing it. Listen, when I was going through my big breakup, I couldn't find very many resources out there that were specifically tailored toward lesbians or women who love women. You don't have to be a lesbian, queer, bisexual, pansexual, any of these things. So I don't want to pigeonhole just lesbians. So yeah, this has been such a journey for me personally. And I heal every single time I work with a woman toward that journey toward themselves. So thank you. That was a very long-winded answer.
No, that's okay. That's great. And it's amazing that you see what you are also getting out of the coaching. You're also healing alongside of them. And I love that concept because, as a healer, and I too am a healer in a physical sense, because I'm a physical therapist. And I also, do sexual health and work with the pelvic floor. So I am healing people, and I can completely relate to that because, the person is benefiting from the information that you're providing, the healing that you're helping them to move through, but they're also, enhancing your life in different ways that sometimes they don't even realize. But, it goes both ways. It's a relationship that you're creating with your clients, And so I think that that's really beautiful that you say that, because it really is, healing, being in the healing field. There's a reason why people like it, because it feels good to help other people, but you also are healing too in your own way.
I love this concept because I feel like there's such a dichotomy between coaching and traditional therapy in a number of different ways. But really with a coach, first of all, in all of my paperwork, I call it a partnership. And I always kind of say that on some of my intake calls is I'm maybe a few steps ahead of you in certain ways. And you could probably coach me. I mean, you could definitely coach me on some things, and all of my clients could coach me on some things. And that's the difference is with a coach, we're really escorting alongside. And they say that the best teachers, they don't tell you what to think. They just show you where to look. And so it's that idea of just pointing the way. Let's go this way and see what we discover. And somebody was asking me, because every single one of my private coaching, I've been wanting to open up a group coaching program for some time, but every single journey is different. And so my syllabus changes and evolves, and I am a creative person, and I'm also highly intuitive. And so every single person, they have their own custom resilience roadmap, is what I call it, that we cultivate at the outset, but it evolves as we work together. And sometimes we might have to throw in an extra session, or sometimes they might finish up early. And because I'm certified in breathwork and neuro-linguistic programming and yoga, they might say, you know what? I've really gotten into yoga. I'd love a very specific 20 or 30 minute yoga session that I can do to release this trauma that I have in my sacral region or in my pelvic floor, because trauma on the physical sense is quite common in our community. And I am certified in a number of different ways to release trauma somatically and intellectually. And of course, we utilize the breath and the body, and so much of this mindset and neuro-linguistic reprogramming, if you will. So yes, I absolutely believe that this is a partnership, and I grow with every single person that I have the opportunity to walk alongside.
That's amazing. And, you mentioned that your focus is the LGBTQ plus community, which I think is wonderful, because, resource wise, that's going to be a community that has less resources. So really focusing on that community is a beautiful thing. And I appreciate that so much. And you mentioned that you came out of the closet when you were divorcing your husband at the age of 40 or so. And I'm curious to know whether you had any desire towards women in your early relationships, or is that something that you sort of discovered as you got older?
Well, no, actually, I was in the closet when I turned 18, I went to college, and one wine night with a friend of mine, things turned, and I discovered that I really enjoyed being sexual with women. I am from the Deep South, the Bible Belt, and so I called myself bisexual for years. And while I dated primarily women, I did have a relationship or two with men kind of sprinkled in there, but I dated mostly women, including when I moved to Paris. I only dated women there. I had been dating a woman for several years back in Louisiana. And then around 25, 26, my biological clock started really ramping up. And I knew that my parents, who still refused to accept that I am gay, I knew that they would not appreciate me getting married to a woman or trying to procreate with a woman. And so I tried to do it, the right way and the traditional way and the way that they would want me to. And so I found a man and
a willing participant.
Well, he is such a great dad for my daughter, and I'm so grateful that we still have a good relationship. I mean, we're not best friends or anything, but poor guy, he definitely asked me, because again, with that wine, I don't drink anymore. It's now been over 4 years that I've not drank any alcohol, but while we were dating and engaged, he asked me before we got married, he said, "Are you sure? Because once you have a few, you're very flirtatious with the ladies." And I was so deep in denial because, Eve, I do have sexual trauma in my past. I was gang raped 15 years ago, and I drank a lot to not admit what had happened to me. So, yeah, I used the wine as a blanket. And really, when I told him that, I was like, oh, no, I mean, I'm bisexual, but no, I'm over that. That was a college thing. And I mean, I really felt like I was being honest with him, because honesty and integrity, wholeheartedness it's one of my deepest core values. And that's why I say heartbroken to wholehearted, because that encompasses so much more. In any case, I really didn't feel like I was lying. I was lying to myself for over a decade, and have now beautifully been able to release that past trauma. And I absolutely love living in my authentic self and being able to be authentically me. Although my parents still rail against me on the regular, sending me Bible verses, which I love the Bible. I love God. I love Jesus. I believe that Jesus loves us all and that God doesn't make mistakes, and that they, he, she, whatever gender, I believe that if God is anything, they're probably genderless, love me exactly as I am, and that I don't need the approval of a church or any kind of indoctrination in order to be loved, because that love that I have begins inside of me. So
absolutely.
Sorry for the tangent.
No, I mean, I agree with you. And I completely agree with you that we are all, deserving of love, and we are all deserving of pleasure. And that's what this podcast is all about, is, letting people feel shameless you know, allowing people to not have that shame, not have those societal constructs hanging over our heads that influence our choices. And, you know, so much so that you married a man because you didn't want to disappoint your parents. And so I can see that that happens over and over in so many relationships for so many different reasons. It may not be the sexuality or, you know, choice of partner, but just for different reasons, you know, and, you know, the divorce rate is 50%. It's so high.
And so it's around 60% when you count second marriages. It only goes up the more times you get married. So it's over 50% for first marriages, but
over 60% for second marriages, which I did not know. And that
like 3/4 to third. It's
so it goes up as you go.
Yeah. And I believe that's just hopeless romantic. I'm a hopeless romantic. I've now been married and divorced twice, and I want to get married again. Even though I was so frustrated at the time that I don't think that the government, the state, has any say in who I love and how I love them. However, I love being married. I love the comfort, the security, I love weddings. I guess I'm just a hopeless romantic, and I will never, I don't think, stop wanting to have a spouse, a partner. And I do want to touch on something that you mentioned, because when I first got sober, it was actually when I was pregnant with my daughter. I realized when I was sober for the first time that I couldn't be intimate with my ex-husband.
Wow.
That was the first sign that I was like, oh my gosh, I'm using this alcohol as a crutch, as a wet blanket over my emotions. And I was, you know, I mean, I don't know if you've been pregnant, and it's your business, but it causes a slew of hormones. And that's when I really began to look at what I was doing with my life and how I was spending my time and what I'm not admitting to. And it really allowed me beautifully to begin to do the work on myself and to begin to spend time going within and looking what I'm not admitting. And so, yeah, it's the beginning of a really beautiful era of my life that started with a lot of difficulty. And, you know, anyway, I know that the topic is intimacy. So I just thought I might mention that.
I appreciate that. Yeah, I do appreciate that because, you know, the podcast is about sexuality, and the fact that you felt after having, you know, eliminated alcohol from your life because you were pregnant and you were being a responsible mom and, you know, eliminating alcohol, and suddenly you realize that, you know, behaviorally things were different for you. And did you feel like the alcohol allowed you to be more open sexually with your husband? Or what exactly was it that, you know, you felt at that moment? Because that's pretty deep. I mean, you know, realizing that after having eliminated alcohol, that's got to be a huge realization for you.
It took some time because, of course, when you first get pregnant, well, and I won't speak to everyone's experience, but for me, there was a lot of exhaustion, and we had been trying consistently and had given up. And I actually told my now ex-husband that I wanted a divorce while I was drunk on New Year's Eve. And he kind of pulled his normal slick moves, and that's the night that it happened.
Wow.
And so I retracted my I want a divorce statement and was trying to make it work. And, you know, I had already been toying with some sobriety in 2018 on my own. I'm sorry, in 2015 on my own without being pregnant, just wanting to drink less. You know, there's these dry January, or sometimes people do it in November in preparation for December. And in any case, the realization was visceral, but it took me a little while to realize really what it was. I had just started meditating regularly when I got pregnant. I was always a meditator, but I wasn't very consistent about it. I would use it as stress relief, or I would go to a meditation session at a yoga studio, or utilize it at the end of yoga while you're laying in corpse pose and shavasana. But I found a meditation coach and was able to really formulate a practice. And it was through that sitting with myself consistently that it brings a lot of awareness to your thoughts. And it's like you've got this opportunity to watch your thoughts and to dissociate from your thoughts and to detach from your thoughts and see them as not part of you, but as something that's occurring in your energetic field, in your spatial awareness. And it just, I can't access, I'd probably have to go into deep meditation to really access how I felt. But I know that it was the beginning of me beginning to unpack the sexual trauma and realizing that I had been utilizing the alcohol in order to continue to be intimate with men, because I went back into the closet, was raped a few years later, and then got married several years after that. I met him several years after, and then we got married about 3 years after that. So, sometimes we don't have the time to analyze what's going on in our lives. We're just making decision after decision, and we don't have that kind of 30,000 foot view that you have on a plane where you can see the outlines of the crops and you can see the interstates. Right. But that's the gift of meditation, is it allows us to really look at what we're doing and our habits and our thoughts, and to begin to unpack them in a more systematic, more scientific way.
Yeah. And, you mentioned that you were on the verge of having that divorce conversation when you ended up pregnant. And then at that point, you decided to, again, push your emotions away and try and, save the marriage for the kids, right? Quote unquote, or for the child.
Our parents, for the family at large, if you will.
Exactly. All of the things that, influence us to make the decisions that we make. And, often those decisions are not the best decisions for us, because you were already feeling like you were ready to move on. And this sort of prolonged that, because eventually it did happen, So I find that very interesting, because so many women are in that position. And I know that I myself, having come from, I've been divorced as well. I do have children. And, trying to keep it together, for the kids, so that, they don't grow up in a broken home, and all of that crosses parents' minds, when you have children and you're married and you want to get divorced, And so how do you coach your clients through, similar situations like you experienced?
Yeah, heartbreak is such a universal phenomenon. And it happens, like I mentioned in my opening story, on a number of different levels. Even if there's not infidelity, oftentimes we have a sense of betrayal. Even if you're the one who asks for the ending of the relationship, whether that be a legal partnership or otherwise, by legal partnership, I mean a marriage or otherwise, we can often have this sense of loss. And sometimes women come to me, and I do work with people who are not women, but primarily I really enjoy working with women because we speak similar languages, especially in the LGBTQ plus community. They come to me and they say, like, I had all these goals with this woman who I was in a relationship with for 6 years or 10 years or 16 years. We were going to start a family, and we were going to move to this place, and we were going to buy a house here. And all these co-created realities, future realities, decisions that they had made together. And they're like, I really don't know what's up, what's down, what I really want. I don't know how to parse my desires from our communal desires. And now that she's no longer there, how do I even begin to move forward? And so in answer to your question, I believe that there are 3 levels to resilience. And they might seem rather simple, but I believe the first level of resilience is our bodies. The second is our breath. And the third is our mind. And I believe that body and breath together create the mind. Because where is the mind and the body? Is it inside your brain? And so when we begin to work together, we begin first with roots and routines. After onboarding, usually that first week is called roots and routines. And we get back to the root of who the client is. So tapping into personal core values. Because I believe that, yes, we are the same person essentially from when we're young until we get old, because we have these values that are instilled in us, or maybe we've chosen to embody based off of experiences. But we also are creating ourselves bit by bit, breath by breath, choice by choice, every single day. And I mean, the things that we do are actions. They start with thoughts, right? Start with thoughts, we can have actions. Actions done repeatedly are habits, and our habits create our character. So again, we start with the roots. Who are you? And then who is it that you want to become, that you want to fully step into? And we work backwards from there to put routines in place so that clients can day by day, breath by breath, choice by choice, step into the future version of themselves by embodying and breathing and having the right mindset, these 3 levels of resilience. So we work on embodiment, literally, with our meditations. I am certified in breathwork. And so we incorporate and layer in the breathwork with the body work. And then once those 2 practices are really established and we can locate where these emotions lie in our bodies, where they sit, where they vibrate, literally, then we begin to work on the mind, because by this point, I've basically tricked them into meditating every single day. There's body work, embodiment practices, and breath work. And maybe they're a meditator already. It's very upfront. I tell them we're going to use meditative practices, and I say you're going to do this for 3 minutes twice a day, and then next week they're doing it for 6 minutes twice a day. And if they're already a meditator and they already have a practice, then we can really go deeper, which is why I say that it's such a custom program for every single client. But once they have that established meditation practice, and some clients come in and I say, hey, we can knock this out in 6 weeks because you've done so much work already. It's actually somewhat common. I would say 50% of my clients, instead of the 9-week program, we're actually able to do it in 6 or 7 weeks. And so once they've got this meditation practice established, we begin looking at what are the disempowering beliefs that we're telling ourselves about our ability to love, our future. What are we making this relationship mean about who we are, the demise of this relationship? And again, we're those 3 levels of resilience, body, breath, and mind, are the basis of my program. And if a client is ready, I have an optional, because my sessions are just 40 minutes long. And if they're ready, I do an optional 90-minute deep dive. And this is NLP. So it's NLRP. It's neuro-linguistic reprogramming, because by that point in the program, I've got a lot of the client's language and a lot of the places where this trauma, because the end of a relationship, coming full circle to what we talked about at the beginning, this is a trauma. This is a stripping away. We have this really bereft, isolated feeling like we're being dismembered, or like we're being thrown out of the tribe, outside the walls of the city. when we're socially rejected by the person that we love the most. And most of my clients have been on the receiving end of the breakup. Some of them did the breaking up and they still can't get over them. So we use this 90-minute session in order to reprogram these areas of the body where we're experiencing this trauma, this loss, and change it into something that we actually do want to feel. Because physiologically, whether you're about to give a big presentation that you've been preparing for, but you have no idea what the outcome is going to be, or you're about to get on a roller coaster where you feel safe, some of the same physiological things happen to our bodies. And so we can utilize what's happening physiologically in relation to the loss of this relationship and change our thinking about it, because life is 20% skill set and 80% mindset. It's so much. And this has been proven over and over and over again in scientific studies.
Yeah, I was talking,
conceptualize it.
I was talking in another podcast about the neural pathways and how, creating that neural pathway of negativity, and constantly feeding that negativity, is only creating that pathway to be so much stronger. And so to switch it over to a positive mindset, and constantly giving that pathway, that neural pathway, more, traffic, so to speak.
Yep.
So that, you can really create a positive mindset and change the way that you think about, whatever situation you're talking about. We're talking about breakups here. And I think that is a really great concept that you are helping your clients with. And you mentioned trauma multiple times, having experienced trauma yourself and helping clients through trauma, and also the breakup itself as being a traumatic experience too. And trauma really shuts you down, it almost can cause, a regression in your maturity in a lot of ways, and so, creating a space so that you can, process that trauma safely is so important. And I want to touch upon the breath work specifically, because, our breath is what keeps us alive. You know what I mean? It's so important. And when you can control your breath, you can really make such a difference in your affect and your healing potential, and also your sexual desire and your, ability to receive pleasure. So do you want to expand on that at all?
Absolutely. There's an amazing book called Breath by James Nestor that I continue to read snippets of over and over again. And as a trained yogi, the yogis called breath our prana, life force energy. And here's the science. I mean, we can survive for a few weeks without food, a few days without water, but only a few minutes without our breath. So it literally, I mean, it's the definition of life. When we come into the world, we take that first breath, and that last exhalation signifies the end of our lives. And the way that we breathe affects our stress level. And this is what I, historically and continue to work with students, clients on, is being able to locate where they're actually feeling tension and utilizing the breath to find that area and lubricate it, if you will, so that it can open up, and so that energy, literal vibrations, don't get stuck in that area. I am a student of, so I don't teach holotropic breath work, but I have been a Wim Hofer on many occasions, and I have a practitioner that I meet with periodically who uses a holotropic type breath, this intentional heavy breathing where we're over oxygenating our blood supply, and then utilizing long breath holds. So I've done a lot of holotropic work, and there's major power in the ability. I'm not comfortable leading people through it because I would like to get more certifications in that area, but I do point people toward other resources. There are plenty. I went to a group event in Tampa Bay recently, maybe a year ago, where he's actually, utilizing music and eliciting physiological responses and helping people work through trauma in a group setting. I've done things like that in yoga studios as well, where they're utilizing the holotropic breathwork. And to touch on the sexuality, because a lot of the holotropic breathwork is in and out of the mouth, which is very similar to heightened states that we have when we're surprised, when we're having an orgasm. We're typically breathing in this fashion. And so this one practitioner that I work with regularly, he said it without saying it, and I'm filling in the blanks here, is that the holotropic breathwork is intentional because we have excited states utilizing this open mouth, intense, actually it's like extending the exhale. Sometimes it's more inhale and then this release on the exhale. There's so many different kinds of breath that a given person might be in the habit of utilizing when they're in between the sheets. And so it is absolutely something that we can harness and that we can use intentionally. I mean, I'm sure maybe you've had people on your podcast talking about forms of asphyxiation. And I mean, this is breath holding, right? Which the ancient yogis thousands of years ago, before they developed yoga as we see it, those are the physical asana practices. It was breath work. It was meditation through breath work 3,500 years ago, and chanting specifically. So using the vibration that we create willfully here, which chanting is breath work. And so many different traditions have chanting. I mean, whether it's the Gregorian chants or the Buddhist chants, it's ubiquitous and it's so, so powerful. And I do lead chanting locally. So yeah,
Nice.
You might think about when you're having an orgasm, that's your own kind of personal chant, if you will. And definitely.
I love that. I love that connection that you're making because, I hadn't ever really thought about, the type of breathing that you're doing, like specific. There's a lot of different yogic breathing, but the technique talking about specifically where you're breathing in and out of your mouth quickly, my goodness, like direct tie to when you're orgasming and prior to that, and the way that your body responds to, sexual touch, exploration, etc. So I think that that's super interesting.
And on that, so I gave birth at a birthing center where there was no possibility of having any drugs, and I did that intentionally.
Okay.
And I had a doula and midwives. And when I was preparing for the birth, my doula told me that I would probably want to make some guttural, like kinds of sounds while I was giving birth. And I was like, I am not going to be doing that. No, thank you. And she reminded me of it while I was in the throes of the experience. And let me tell you, so the yogis say that this sacral area, the perineum and above in the uteral area, is very connected to this fifth throat chakra. And if you look at it physiologically, the cervix itself, as well as the perineum, the floor, the pelvic floor, it looks very similar to if you look down on the esophagus to our vocal cords. And the release that I had in my groin by utilizing my throat was incomprehensible.
While you were giving birth, you mean?
While I was giving birth. It allowed for so much release down there by utilizing, this is the only place on our body where we can willfully vibrate. I mean, everything's vibrating, right? Your desk is vibrating. The walls are vibrating slowly. But this is the only place where we can willfully vibrate. And they say, right, the pen is mightier than the sword. We could cut someone by utilizing this vibration with our words, right? So anyway, I just thought I would mention that because you might enjoy that aspect.
Yeah, definitely. And I think about the guttural sound because, during my births, I was very, very quiet. Like I didn't make any noise, which everyone was kind of surprised about. And me too, because I wasn't planning on being that way. It's just the way that my body manifested during that time. But I can totally relate to the guttural sounds with orgasm, and sometimes those sounds just escape me and I'm like, whoa, I mean, I have a very small voice. I've always had a very little voice my whole life. And I've always been compared to, having a childlike voice. Oftentimes when I, pick up the phone, people ask me, is your mother home? So I'm surprised by the guttural sounds that come out of my mouth sometimes. And it's always during orgasm. And I think that that's super interesting that you just said that. We're sort of running a little bit low on time. And I know that you, need to be somewhere. So I just want to move on to my last question that I normally ask my guests. And I hope that this isn't too personal for you. But I do like to ask my guests this question. So what is your favorite sex position and why?
Well, with women, the missionary style usually has two segments, right? Because we're giving and then receiving. I have experimented with some other positions, and I find that as I get older, really the missionary style is the friendliest. So it's best for me and my spine to have my partner at the edge of the bed, kind of like if you're getting an exam from the
Yes.
OB,
Yes.
so that you don't have to really crane your neck back so much. It allows for a lot more flexibility in that area. And so personally, when I'm giving, that's my favorite. I've never liked 69 with any gender. It's just never really worked for me. And I have had some interesting experiences receiving from a woman in other positions. I don't really want to think back to my times with men, but those are very person specific,
Absolutely.
with certain people, we always did it, or, we found that there were certain spots that our parts really rubbed together the best and that we would both experience, or sometimes it would be one person liked it this way, and then we would switch around so that the other person could get theirs, right? And so, yeah, I think that's a great question. And it's something that, because I have tried a lot of toys in the bedroom with women in various capacities, strap-ons and things that are not strapped on. But, there's just something about the human body that is so much more authentic. And so my favorite position is where we can be skin to skin. And I sometimes wish that it were possible for us to orgasm at the same time. And it is possible. There's just a little gymnastics involved in the bed and a little scooching around to make it maybe not like a 69, but maybe an 87 kind of thing.
I mean, I think you just mentioned like so many things that I want to touch upon. 69 is a fun position, but if that's, if you're trying to orgasm in that position, it's kind of difficult because you're giving and receiving at the exact same time. So you can't really focus as much on the receiving because you're also giving. So you're not completely focused on your own pleasure. It's a fun position, definitely, to throw in the mix. But I agree with you about 69. It's not the top of my list, although I do enjoy it often. But I also want to point out the fact that, sex looks different in all types of relationships. And, in a gay relationship or two women, or the LGBTQ, plus community, sex is going to look different in every single one of those relationships, and so and I'm just trying to understand what you're saying. So if you don't mind, I'm just going to elaborate a little bit. And you like missionary for
missionary for women means like
one person laying down
on her back. She's on her back with her legs open. And I personally like to be off the bed, basically on my knees or on a pillow or other.
So that you can provide oral sex.
Yes, exactly.
Gotcha. Okay. So and I was reading
oral and manual.
Right.
Oral and manual stimulation. Yep.
Right.
Which some women don't like penetration at all.
Correct.
And some women don't like oral. They only want to be manually stimulated while you're kissing. There's a lot of differentiation in the community. And it's definitely a conversation that two women have sometimes before they ever get naked.
Yes. I love that because you're communicating about sex, which a lot of times in heteronormative relationships
does not happen.
There is nothing being communicated and you're just muddling through and trying to figure it out without having any conversation. And women that have relationships with other women often have these conversations, and men who have relationships with other men often have these conversations, or almost always have these conversations, and it's so important to communicate about our sexuality. And I think that is just the bottom line.
Agreed. Yes. I think it's a missed opportunity when it's not included in the relationship, when one partner or the other or both miss that opportunity to talk about it outside of the bed, even if it occurs afterwards. If you let your bodies do the talking initially, but then are able to really speak openly in bed, out of bed. I really like it when you do this. I really,
Absolutely.
And promoting that, what I do like, instead of turning toward
the negative.
I really like that so much. Yeah.
Right. Yeah, focusing on what you really love about what they did so that they can do it again, Right. This is how we close our own orgasm gap. And, I talk a lot about the orgasm gap. And really the orgasm gap does not exist in lesbian relationships because both parties' needs are being considered, and it exists in all heterosexual relationships, whether it be hookup sex all the way to marriage and everything in between. And so closing that orgasm gap is one of my missions on this podcast for all of our listeners out there, because everybody deserves pleasure. Everybody deserves to feel good. And if you're only focusing on one person's pleasure and negating the other person's pleasure, that is not okay.
It can happen. And something you may want to invite a lesbian expert. There's something we call it in the lesbian community called lesbian bed death. And so it is a prominent problem because sometimes, and I'm not an expert on this, only in my own experience, sometimes both women, or at least one woman, is not accustomed to being the aggressor. And so when that's the case for both women, and you are so interested in talking to one another and having an otherwise physical or, whatever your love language might be, maybe that's words of affirmation or acts of service or gifts. And there's so many different ways that women can give love to one another that isn't necessarily physical. And lesbian bed death is a real thing. And so some women are continued to be partnered or married for years or even decades and haven't had sex. They haven't connected intimately in a long, long time. And so, that might be something for you to explore.
I absolutely will. And, I haven't heard of that concept before, lesbian bed death, but I'm sure it's similar to bed death in all other relationships.
Exactly. Yeah.
Because it happens in long-term relationships when you've been with somebody for a long time. It's very common. So, reconnecting and, having that physical relationship for me in my relationships is so important. I can't imagine being in another sexless relationship. And I know that I did do that once before, and it's never going to happen again.
No mas, she said.
No mas, no mas.
Right.
I want to make sure that all of my guests can find you. So could you please make sure that we know where we can find you?
SaraWebbSays.com. That's SaraWebbSays.com. And I'm also on Instagram and LinkedIn. I'm Sara Webb from St. Petersburg. And you can find my business page on Facebook, Sara Webb Says, SaraWebbSays.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Sara. And I am so interested in the breathwork class that you took.
Yep.
Yeah, the class that you took. And who knows, maybe we'll run into each other one of these days in a seminar, or maybe I'll be coming to one of yours. I live in Florida too. So there's a possibility of us meeting one day. So hopefully that'll happen. I feel like
we should make it happen. Yeah, let's make it happen.
Make it happen. Absolutely. Well, I am so thrilled to have had you on today, and I thank you for being here with me today. And
thank you, Eve.
Until next time.
Until next time. Yep.
Absolutely. Bye-bye. Visit pleaseme.online to reach Eve, or for more information on products to increase blood flow and overall health, for her curated list of her favorite toys, and for swag that shows that you are a big fan. Please consider supporting the show.